Story number 1. Shadows at the Texas Precinct. I've always believed that some places hold onto their past a little too tightly, lingering in the shadows where memories refuse to fade. The Precinct 12 in rural Texas was one such place. Nestled between vast stretches of farmland and the occasional stretch of highway, it stood as a relic of a bygone era, its brick facade weathered by countless storms and relentless sun. But it wasn't just the building's age that gave it character. It was the stories whispered among the officers, the unexplained phenomena that plagued the night shifts, and the lingering presence of a fallen comrade who never truly left. My name is Officer Jake Thompson, and I've been with the Texas Rangers for nearly a decade. Most of my career has been spent in bustling city precincts, but a transfer to Precinct 12 offered a quieter life. One where I could focus on the basics of policing without the chaos of urban crime. I thought I was prepared for the isolation, but nothing could have prepared me for the haunting that awaited me in those old halls. It was late October, the air crisp with the promise of winter, when I first heard the stories of the ghostly apparitions. New recruits often shared tales of seeing shadows move on their own, hearing footsteps echo through empty corridors, and witnessing doors slam shut without a breeze in sight. At first, I dismissed them as overactive imaginations fueled by the precinct's eerie ambience. But as nights turned into weeks, I began to experience the phenomena myself. One particularly quiet night, I was wrapping up paperwork in my small, cluttered office when the lights flickered overhead. The hum of the fluorescent bulbs was momentarily interrupted by a low, mournful groan that seemed to emanate from the very walls. I glanced up, half expecting to see one of my colleagues pulling a prank. But the office was empty, probably just the old wiring acting up again. I muttered to myself, returning to my desk, but the uneasy feeling in my chest wouldn't let me shake it off. Just as I was about to dive back into my paperwork, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching from the hallway. I stood up, heart pounding, and shone my flashlight down the corridor. There was no one there. The footsteps had stopped, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed against my ears. I approached the door, slowly pushing it open, and peered into the dimly lit hallway. That's when I saw him. A figure stood at the far end of the corridor, his uniform pristine despite the years that had passed since he last wore it. His face was pale, eyes hollow with an unspoken sorrow. It was Detective Mike Lawson, a respected officer who had tragically lost his life in a traffic accident just 5 years ago. The memory of his death was still fresh in the precinct's collective memory, a somber reminder of the fragility of life. "Mike," I whispered, stepping into the hallway. "Is that you?" He didn't respond. Instead, he began to walk toward me, each step slow and deliberate. The air grew colder as he approached, my breath visible in the dim light. His presence was overwhelming, a tangible weight pressing down on me. "Jake," he finally spoke, his voice echoing eerily in the empty corridor. "You've got to help me." I reached out, but my hand passed through him as if he were made of mist. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Mike, what do you need? What happened?" He stopped just inches away, his eyes pleading. "There's unfinished business. Someone needs to know the truth about my accident. It wasn't just a simple crash, it was foul play." Before I could respond, the temperature dropped further, and the lights flickered again, casting long, wavering shadows across the walls. Mike's form began to fade, his figure becoming more translucent with each passing second. "Find the evidence," he urged, his voice fading. "Clear my name." And just like that, he was gone, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence of the precinct. My heart raced, and I struggled to steady my breathing, the encounter leaving me shaken to the core. The next day, determination replaced my fear. I couldn't ignore Mike's plea. I delved into old case files, sifting through records and reports, searching for any clues that might shed light on the circumstances surrounding his death. The official report had ruled it a tragic accident, a collision on a rainy night that took Mike's life instantly. But something didn't sit right with me. As I pored over the files, I stumbled upon a series of inconsistencies, witness statements that didn't align, missing pieces of evidence, and a pattern of behavior from a fellow officer that seemed suspicious. It was a tangled web of deceit and betrayal that pointed to a cover-up. One that had silenced Mike Lawson permanently. Late one night, as I was about to call it a day, I heard the footsteps again, this time louder and more insistent. I followed the sound to the interrogation room, heart pounding, and found the door ajar. I pushed it open, only to find the room empty, save for a single piece of evidence, a blood-stained badge that belonged to Detective Sam Reynolds, a colleague who had always been friendly but had a reputation for cutting corners. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Sam Reynolds had been implicated in several unofficial investigations, his methods questionable at best. Could he have been involved in Mike's death? The thought was chilling, and I knew I had to confront him. The next morning, I approached Sam's desk, my mind racing with the implications of what I'd found. He looked up, a smirk playing on his lips. "Morning, Jake." Burning the midnight oil, I steadied my voice, holding up the badge. "Sam, we need to talk about Mike Lawson." His expression changed instantly, the smirk fading into a mask of calm denial. Mike was a good man. He died in an accident, just like it was reported. But I wasn't convinced. I pressed on, presenting the inconsistencies I had uncovered. Sam's facade began to crack, his eyes narrowing as he realized I was onto something. "You're digging into things you shouldn't, Jake. Some truths are better left buried." Undeterred, I continued my investigation, gathering evidence and piecing together the puzzle that had led to Mike's death. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that Sam Reynolds had orchestrated a series of events to eliminate Mike, covering his tracks to protect his own reputation and career. One night, as I was about to leave the precinct, the lights flickered, and the temperature dropped once more. I felt a presence behind me, and when I turned, there stood Mike Lawson, his expression one of gratitude and relief. "Jake, you did it," he whispered, his voice filled with peace. "You found the truth." I nodded, a sense of accomplishment washing over me. "I'm sorry it took so long, Mike." He gave a faint smile before fading away, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as his spirit found the closure it needed. With Sam Reynolds exposed and brought to justice, the strange phenomena at Precinct 12 ceased, the shadows lifting as if a weight had been removed from the building. In the weeks that followed, the precinct felt lighter, the air less heavy with unresolved sorrow. Mike's legacy was finally honored, his name cleared, and his spirit at peace. But the experience left a lasting impact on me, a reminder that sometimes the job requires more than just enforcing the law. It requires uncovering the truth, no matter how dark or difficult it may be. And every time I pass by Precinct 12, I can't help but feel a lingering presence, a silent acknowledgement of the bond we share beyond life and death. Because in the heart of Texas, where shadows linger and whispers echo through the night, there are stories waiting to be told, spirits yearning for redemption, and a reminder that even in the darkest places, truth and justice can prevail. Story number 2. Vanishing Point. I never believed in ghosts. Not until that night on Fifth Avenue changed everything I thought I knew about the world. My name is Michael Lawson, and I'm a police officer in New York City. For over 15 years, I've patrolled these streets, dealing with everything from petty thefts to serious crimes. But nothing in my career could have prepared me for the haunting encounter that unfolded on a chilly November evening. It was around 11 p.m., the kind of night where the city never truly sleeps. Yet certain streets like Fifth Avenue seemed to hold their breath under the dim glow of streetlights. I had received a call about a minor traffic accident involving a sedan that had spun out of control near the intersection of Fifth and Main. Upon arriving, the scene was relatively undisturbed. No significant damage, no visible injuries. The driver's side window was shattered, and the car was leaning precariously against the curb. I approached cautiously, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through the darkness to reveal the driver's seat. According to the dispatcher, the medical team had already declared the driver dead at the scene. But as I drew closer, something felt off. The air was unusually still, and an inexplicable chill settled over me, raising the hairs on the back of my neck. "Hello? Can you hear me?" I called out, my voice echoing slightly in the silent night. There was no response. The driver's door remained ajar, the interior of the car bathed in an eerie stillness. I decided to take a closer look, stepping into the sedan with a mix of curiosity and unease. The dashboard was shattered, the steering wheel twisted unnaturally. But what caught my attention wasn't the wreckage. It was the figure standing beside the car. A man, perhaps in his early 40s, stood a few feet away, his form barely visible in the dim light. He was dressed in a business suit, the fabric pristine despite the chaos around him. His eyes locked onto mine, wide with confusion and fear. "Please, help me," he whispered, his voice cracking with desperation. I blinked, questioning my own senses. According to the reports, the driver had died instantly from the impact. But here he was, alive, standing beside his mangled vehicle. My training kicked in, pushing aside the irrational fear that threatened to overtake me. "Sir, are you okay? What happened here?" He took a step closer, his eyes darting around as if searching for something or someone. I don't know," he stammered. "One moment I was driving, and the next, everything went dark." Before I could respond, a gust of wind swept through the area, causing the car doors to slam shut with a deafening bang. The man gasped, clutching his chest as if in pain. But there was no visible injury. Panic surged through me. "What do you mean everything went dark? Are you injured?" He shook his head vigorously, his eyes pleading. "No, I saw something, a figure in the middle of the road. I tried to swerve, but it felt like something was pulling me back. I scanned the area, but there was no sign of another vehicle or any obstruction on the road." "Where did you see this figure? Maybe we can find a witness or some footage." He looked at me, desperation etched into every line of his face. "No, it was like it vanished right before my eyes. And now I can't remember anything else." I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. The situation was highly irregular, to say the least. "All right, let's get you out of the car and take you to the station for further questioning." As I guided him out of the sedan, a strange sensation washed over me, like a heavy fog enveloping my mind, making it difficult to think clearly. We moved to the nearby patrol car, and I offered him a seat, trying to make sense of what was happening. But before we could proceed, the man abruptly stood up, his body stiff with fear. "I have to go," he insisted, glancing back towards the accident site. "They're coming for me." Confusion flickered in my eyes. "Who's coming for you? What do you mean?" He shook his head again, his face contorted in anguish. "I can't explain. Just help me find them." With that cryptic plea, he turned and sprinted down the darkened street, disappearing into the night without a trace. I stood there, stunned, watching him vanish into the shadows. My mind raced, trying to process the impossible scenario. The dispatcher had confirmed that the driver had died on impact. Yet here was someone else claiming to be alive, pleading for help. I immediately radioed for backup, but there was no response. The patrol car's lights flickered overhead, casting long, unsettling shadows that danced across the deserted street. An overwhelming sense of dread settled in my stomach as I retraced my steps back to the accident site, hoping to find some clue as to what had just transpired. As I approached the sedan once more, the air grew colder, the darkness seeming to press in on me from all sides. I reached out to touch the car, feeling the rough texture of the shattered glass beneath my fingertips. Suddenly, a faint whisper echoed through the night, sending shivers down my spine. "Leave this place." I whipped around, my flashlight beam sweeping the area. But there was no one there. The street was empty. save for the remnants of the accident and the unsettling stillness that now enveloped the scene. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized I wasn't alone. Not in the way I had thought. Determined to find answers, I decided to review the security footage from the nearby cameras. As I scanned through the grainy images, my blood ran cold. The footage showed the man I had encountered standing beside his car, just as I had described. But moments later, he began to flicker, his form becoming translucent until he was nothing more than a shadowy silhouette. The screen went black, leaving me with more questions than answers. I contacted my superiors, explaining the bizarre incident, but their skepticism was palpable. "Officer Harris, it sounds like you had a bit too much on your plate tonight." One of them suggested dismissively, "Maybe you should take a break." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was at play. The dispatcher had mentioned that the car had been involved in a fatal accident 10 years ago, the same location where I had just witnessed the impossible. Curiosity and a sense of duty compelled me to dig deeper into the history of the area. Over the next few weeks, I delved into old records, uncovering a tragic story that had been buried under layers of time and silence. 10 years ago, a young man named Thomas Green had lost his life in a gruesome accident on that very spot. His car had spun out of control, killing him instantly. The case had been closed as a simple accident, but whispers of foul play and mysterious circumstances had lingered in the community. As I pieced together the fragments of Thomas's story, I couldn't ignore the parallels between his fate and the encounter I had experienced. The cold gusts of wind, the vanishing man. Could it be that Thomas's spirit was still trapped, unable to move on from his untimely death? Driven by a need to help, I returned to the accident site one last time, armed with knowledge and a determination to bring peace to a restless soul. The night was quiet, the air still with an eerie calm. I approached the sedan, now a relic of the past, and stood in silence, waiting for any sign of the supernatural. As midnight approached, the temperature dropped once more, and the fog began to roll in thick and heavy. I felt a presence, a weight pressing down on me, as if the very air was filled with sorrow and desperation. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of my own breathing. Then, as if summoned by my presence, Thomas appeared once more, a ghostly figure standing beside his car, his eyes filled with a haunting emptiness. "Help me," he whispered, his voice echoing through the night. I reached out, my voice gentle and compassionate. "Thomas, I'm here to help you. What do you need?" He looked at me, his expression a mix of pain and longing. "Find the truth. Set me free." Determined to honor his plea, I promised to uncover the full story behind his death and bring closure to his spirit. Over the following months, I worked tirelessly, reopening old investigations, interviewing witnesses, and uncovering hidden truths that had been concealed for a decade. The deeper I dug, the more I realized that Thomas's death had been no accident. There were signs of tampering, evidence that someone had deliberately caused his car to crash. With this new information, I was able to piece together the events leading up to his tragic demise, revealing a web of deceit and betrayal that had been meticulously hidden. Armed with the truth, I returned to the accident site one final time, determined to give Thomas the peace he deserved. As I stood beside his car, the air grew heavy with anticipation. The temperature dropped, and the fog swirled around me, creating an ethereal atmosphere that seemed to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. "Thomas," I called out softly, my voice steady despite the lingering fear. "I've found the truth. Your death was no accident. It was a crime, and the perpetrator has been brought to justice." A sense of relief washed over me as I spoke the words, the oppressive energy lifting as if a weight had been removed from the night. Thomas's spirit began to shimmer, his form becoming more defined and peaceful. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice filled with gratitude. "Now, I can finally move on." As his apparition faded, the night seemed to brighten, the fog dissipating to reveal the first light of dawn breaking through the darkness. I felt a profound sense of accomplishment, knowing that I had helped a lost soul find peace and closure. From that night on, the accident site remained quiet, the eerie phenomena ceasing as if the restless spirit had finally found rest. My experience on Fifth Avenue became a turning point in my career, a reminder that sometimes the job requires more than just enforcing the law. It requires compassion, understanding, and a willingness to confront the unknown. And every time I patrol those quiet streets, I carry with me the memory of Thomas Green, a man whose life was cut short but whose spirit found peace through truth and justice. Because in the heart of the city, where the lines between the living and the dead blur under the veil of night, there are stories waiting to be told, souls yearning for redemption, and a reminder that even in the most ordinary places, the extraordinary can unfold in the shadows. Story number 3. The Haunting of Maple Street. I've always prided myself on being a rational man. As a police officer in the suburbs of Los Angeles, I've seen my fair share of the strange and the inexplicable. But nothing quite prepared me for what happened one fateful October night on Maple Street. My name is Officer Daniel Harris, and this is the story of how a routine patrol turned into a haunting encounter that forever changed my perception of reality. It was a crisp autumn evening, the kind where the leaves crunch underfoot and the air carries a hint of impending winter. I was on my usual route, patrolling the quieter side streets to ensure everything was in order. Maple Street was a peaceful neighborhood, lined with old oak trees and modest homes, each with its own history and secrets. Most nights were uneventful, but tonight felt different, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that I couldn't quite place. As midnight approached, the streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, and the sounds of crickets filled the air. My cruiser's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the occasional parked car and the silhouette of a lone figure walking down the sidewalk. It was then that I saw her, a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, walking briskly along the deserted street. She was dressed in a simple, white dress that fluttered slightly in the cool night breeze, her face partially obscured by her long, dark hair. I slowed down, watching her for a moment before deciding to follow. There was something about her that seemed out of place, a sense of urgency that made me want to ensure she was safe. I turned off the patrol light and kept a safe distance behind her, my instincts telling me that something wasn't right. After a few minutes, she stopped near the corner of Maple and Elm, glancing nervously around as if sensing something or someone. Following her, I parked a short distance away and approached cautiously, the flashlight from my cruiser casting a narrow beam of light in front of me. "Good evening, ma'am," I called out, keeping my tone calm and professional. "Is everything all right? Do you need any assistance?" She turned to face me, her eyes wide with fear. "Please, help me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Someone's following me. I don't know what to do." Concern surged through me as I opened my door and stepped out into the night. "I'm Officer Harris. What's your name?" "Emily," she replied, clutching her dress tightly around her. "They won't let me go." I looked around, expecting to see a suspicious figure lurking in the shadows. But the street was empty. "Who's following you, Emily? Can you describe them?" She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know. They're always there, watching me, every night." Before I could ask more, Emily suddenly vanished before my eyes, leaving behind nothing but a chilling gust of wind and the faint sound of her desperate whispers. I stood there, stunned, as the air around me grew inexplicably cold. My heart pounded in my chest, and I reached for my radio, unsure of what to do next. "Dispatch, this is Officer Harris. I need a supervisor at Maple Street. Unit 27. I reported, my voice shaky. "There was a woman here who claims she's being followed, but she just disappeared." After a few tense moments, Sergeant Laura Mitchell arrived, her expression serious as she listened to my account. "Did you see anyone else? Any suspicious activity before she vanished?" I shook my head. "No, it was just her. 1 minute she's there, The next she's gone. Sergeant Mitchell frowned thoughtfully. All right, let's run a check on any reports or incidents in this area. Maybe there's something we're missing. We returned to the patrol car, where Laura began dialing into the database while I processed what had just happened. My mind raced with questions. Had Emily been the victim of a violent crime? Or was there something more sinister at play? According to the records, there was a kidnapping and murder that occurred on Maple Street 10 years ago. Laura informed me, her tone indicating the gravity of the situation. A young woman named Jessica Thompson was taken from her home, and her body was never found. The case went cold. But there have been occasional reports of strange occurrences in that area ever since. A chill ran down my spine as I connected the dots. Do you think Emily could be connected to that case? Maybe a witness or a family member still looking for answers? It's possible, Laura replied. Some believe the area is haunted by Jessica's spirit, unable to find peace after her tragic death. It could explain the reports of strange noises and sightings, especially around the anniversary of her disappearance. Determined to get to the bottom of this, we decided to search the immediate vicinity for any signs of foul play. As we walked down Maple Street, the night seemed to close in around us, the silence punctuated only by the occasional rustle of leaves. We reached the corner where Emily had last been seen, and I noticed something peculiar, a faint, cold draft coming from a nearby alleyway that wasn't there before. Laura, do you feel that? I asked, the cold air sending shivers down my spine. She nodded, her eyes scanning the darkness. Something's not right. Let's check it out. We approached the alley cautiously, the flashlight beams cutting through the gloom. As we turned the corner, the temperature dropped dramatically, my breath visible in the icy air. That's when we saw it, a figure standing at the far end of the alley, its form barely distinguishable in the darkness. It was a woman, dressed in a white dress similar to the one Emily had been wearing, her face obscured by shadows. Emily? I called out, my voice echoing eerily in the confined space. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it slowly began to move towards us, each step deliberate and sorrowful. My heart raced as I realized we were witnessing something supernatural, a lingering spirit trapped between worlds. We need to get out of here, Laura whispered, grabbing my arm. This isn't safe. But as we turned to leave, the figure reached out a hand, her fingers trailing through the air as if trying to communicate something. The whispers we'd heard earlier seemed to intensify, surrounding us with a cacophony of silent pleas. Help me find peace. The whispers echoed in my mind, their meaning clear despite the lack of audible sound. We didn't wait to see what would happen next. We bolted back to the patrol car, the oppressive cold pushing us to drive away as quickly as possible. As we sped down the street, I couldn't shake the feeling that Emily's spirit was still watching us, her sorrow binding her to the place where her life had been brutally taken. Back at the station, Laura and I reviewed the details of the Jessica Thompson case, hoping to find a connection that could explain Emily's appearance. The case files were filled with grisly details. Jessica had been a vibrant young woman with dreams of becoming a teacher, but her life was cut short in a way that left the community in fear and mourning. Do you think Emily saw something she shouldn't have? I mused aloud. Maybe she's a link to Jessica's case, someone who knows the truth. Laura considered this for a moment before nodding. It's possible. Maybe Emily was somehow connected to Jessica. Or perhaps she's a victim herself trying to communicate through the supernatural presence left behind by Jessica. Determined to help both women find peace, we decided to investigate further, reaching out to family members and old friends of Jessica Thompson. The more we dug, the more unsettling the connections became, revealing a web of deceit and violence that had been meticulously covered up over the years. One evening, as I sat alone in my car, reviewing the case notes, I heard a familiar whisper, "Help me find peace." It was Emily's voice, soft and haunting, echoing through the empty parking lot. I looked up, my heart racing, but saw nothing. The street was empty. the night air still and silent. Shaking off the unease, I turned back to my notes, determined to piece together the final clues that would solve both cases. Days turned into weeks, and our investigation led us to a forgotten part of Maple Street, where an old abandoned house stood as a silent witness to the horrors that had unfolded within its walls. It was here that Jessica Thompson had been taken, her disappearance marking the beginning of the supernatural hauntings that plagued the neighborhood. Inside the house, we found evidence of the brutal attack, broken furniture, bloodstains, and a journal belonging to Jessica. The pages detailed her last days, her fears, and her desperate attempts to escape the torment of her captor. It was clear that her spirit had been trapped here, her anguish giving rise to the haunting presence that now connected Emily to her tragic fate. As we delved deeper, the connection between Emily and Jessica became undeniable. Emily had been Jessica's best friend, standing by her side through thick and thin. On the night of the kidnapping, Emily had been nearby, searching for her when she heard the screams. She had rushed to the scene, only to witness the unimaginable horror. The trauma of that night had left her spirit forever linked to Jessica's, their souls intertwined in a dance of sorrow and desperation. Realizing the key to freeing both spirits lay in acknowledging the truth and bringing closure to their stories, we decided to hold a memorial at the site of the old house. With the help of the community, we gathered to honor Jessica and Emily, sharing their stories and ensuring that their suffering would not be forgotten. As we spoke, the air grew warmer, the oppressive cold lifting as if a weight had been removed. The whispers of the past faded, replaced by a peaceful silence that spoke volumes. For the first time in years, the spirits of Jessica and Emily were finally at rest, their stories told and their souls free from the torment that had bound them to Maple Street. That night, as I drove home, the fog rolled in gently, the streetlights casting soft glows on the pavement. Maple Street felt different, lighter, almost serene. I couldn't help but smile, knowing that we had made a difference, that we had helped two lost souls find peace. But even as I relaxed, a faint whisper reached my ears, carried on the night breeze. "Thank you." It was Emily's voice, lingering like a gentle breeze, a reminder that even in death, gratitude and peace can transcend the boundaries of life. From that night on, I approached my job with a renewed sense of purpose, understanding that sometimes the most important cases are the ones that touch the soul. Cypress Ridge Penitentiary had taught me that the past never truly dies, and that helping those who can't help themselves is the true essence of being a police officer. And every time I pass by apartment 27, I remember the night I met Emily, the girl who cried out for help, and the story that needed to be told. Because in the quiet corners of the world, where shadows linger and whispers echo, there are stories waiting to be heard, souls yearning for closure, and a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of bravery involve listening to the silent pleas of those who can't speak for themselves. Story number 4. Apartment 27. Echoes of the Unseen. I never believed in ghosts, not until apartment 27 shattered every ounce of skepticism I had left. My name is Jack Mitchell, and I've been a police officer in Los Angeles for over a decade. Nights like this, patrolling the older parts of the city, were part of the job, but nothing could have prepared me for the encounter that awaited me in apartment 27. It was a chilly October evening, the kind where the wind whispers secrets through the cracks of old buildings. The apartment complex I was assigned to patrol, Evergreen Heights, was one of those sprawling structures from the 1950s that had seen better days. Its hallways were narrow, lined with beige wallpaper that peeled at the corners, and the carpeting was threadbare, worn down by years of heavy foot traffic. Reports had been coming in for weeks about strange noises emanating from apartment 27. Tenants described hearing footsteps, doors slamming, and faint whispers that seemed to echo through the halls long after the sounds should have ceased. Most dismissed it as old building noises or the result of tenants having late-night conversations. But a few, like the elderly Mrs. Patterson, swore they saw a shadowy figure moving through the apartment late at night. As I approached apartment 27, my flashlight cutting through the dim hallway, a sense of unease settled over me. The door was slightly ajar, a rare occurrence in this tightly controlled complex. I knocked firmly, announcing my presence. No response. I pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest, and stepped inside. The apartment was dimly lit, the only source of light coming from the street lamp outside casting long shadows through the half-open blinds. The air was thick with dust, and the scent of mildew hung heavily in the room. I moved cautiously, flashlight beams sweeping the space. The living room was cluttered with old furniture covered in white sheets, giving the room an eerie, abandoned feel. "Hello? Is anyone here?" I called out, my voice echoing slightly in the vast emptiness. No answer. I moved towards the kitchen, the sound of my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. As I entered, the first thing I noticed was the coldness, an unnatural chill that seemed to seep into my bones. I heard it then, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the far end of the kitchen. My heart pounded as I approached, the flashlight revealing nothing but empty countertops and old appliances. The tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by a faint whispering that seemed to swirl around me. "Help me!" I spun around, trying to locate the source of the voice, but saw no one. The apartment was empty. I took a deep breath, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But the feeling of being watched lingered, pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. Deciding to inspect the bedroom, I walked down the hallway, the whispering growing slightly louder. The bedroom door was closed, but not locked. I pushed it open, the hinges squealing as I stepped inside. The room was sparse, with a single bed against one wall and a small dresser on the opposite side. My flashlight flickered, momentarily plunging the room into darkness before stabilizing. As I approached the dresser, I noticed something odd. A photo frame lying face down on the floor. I picked it up, flipping it over to reveal a black and white photograph of a young woman standing in the very apartment I was in. Her eyes were hollow, staring directly at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Suddenly, the temperature dropped even further, and the whispering intensified, now sounding like a chorus of voices all calling my name. "Jack! Jack!" I backed away, my mind racing. Was this some kind of prank? I thought of the tenants, especially Mrs. Patterson, who had been adamant about seeing a shadowy figure. Maybe someone was trying to scare me, but the fear I felt was real, tangible. I turned to leave the bedroom, but the hallway behind me had changed. The once familiar corridor now seemed endless, the walls stretching out unnaturally. The whispers followed me, growing louder, more insistent. "Don't leave. Stay. Help us." Panic set in as I realized I was lost. The layout of apartment 27 was clear in my mind, yet the hallway seemed to loop back on itself, leading me deeper into the apartment's maze-like interior. I stumbled forward, desperate to find an exit, my flashlight flickering erratically. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a shadowy figure standing at the end of the hallway. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The figure was tall, indistinct, its form wavering like smoke in the wind. It began to move towards me, each step deliberate and slow. "Jack! Help us!" The whispering voices echoed around me, the figure now just a few feet away. I mustered all the courage I had, pointing my flashlight directly at the figure. The light pierced through the darkness, revealing the face of the young woman from the photograph. Her eyes were empty, her mouth moving silently, as if she were trying to communicate something I couldn't understand. In that moment, a wave of sorrow washed over me. The apartment wasn't haunted by malevolent spirits, but by the lingering anguish of those who had suffered within its walls. I felt a profound sadness, a desire to help these lost souls find peace. "I'm here to help," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Tell me what you need." The temperature began to rise, the oppressive cold lifting as the figure started to fade. The whispering voices softened, their cries of pain turning into gentle sighs. Thank you. As the figure vanished, the hallway returned to its normal length. The apartment's layout familiar once more. I stood there, breathing heavily, the weight of what I had experienced settling over me. I knew I couldn't leave these spirits in their torment. The next morning, I spoke with Sergeant Ramirez about the incident. He listened intently, his expression serious. Apartment 27 has a dark history, he began. Back in the 1940s, there was a brutal murder here. A young woman was killed in her home, and her spirit has been restless ever since. We've had reports of strange noises and sightings, but nothing concrete. Determined to put an end to the haunting, I decided to take action. I delved into the records, uncovering the tragic story of Emily Hartley, the woman from the photograph. She had been a tenant in apartment 27, living alone and keeping to herself. One night, she was found dead under mysterious circumstances, no signs of forced entry, no clear motive. The case was never solved, leaving Emily's spirit to wander the apartment in search of answers. Armed with this knowledge, I returned to apartment 27 with a sense of purpose. I brought with me a small journal and a voice recorder, hoping to communicate directly with Emily's spirit. As night fell, I once again walked the halls of the old apartment, the whispers guiding me towards the living room. Sitting down on the worn-out couch, I began to speak, my voice steady despite the lingering fear. Emily, I know what happened to you. I want to help you find peace. Can you tell me what you need? For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the room grew cold once more, and the whispering voices filled the air. Find the truth. I opened the journal I had brought, flipping through its pages filled with notes and historical records. I realized that there were gaps in the official reports, discrepancies that needed to be addressed. Determined to uncover the truth, I delved deeper into Emily's past, interviewing former neighbors and scouring old newspapers for any clues. Weeks turned into months, and my investigation revealed a web of secrets and lies. Emily had been involved in a heated dispute with a local landlord over unpaid rent and maintenance issues. On the night of her death, she had confronted him, leading to a violent altercation. The landlord was never charged, and the case went cold, leaving Emily's spirit trapped in the apartment, her anger and sorrow unquenched. Armed with the truth, I returned to apartment 27 one final time. With the evidence in hand, I confronted the lingering spirits, my voice filled with compassion and understanding. Emily, I know what happened. I'm going to make sure the truth is known, so you can finally find peace. As I spoke, the atmosphere in the apartment shifted. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by a warm, soothing presence. The shadows softened, and the whispers turned into a harmonious hum. Emily's spirit appeared once more, her form now serene and at peace. Thank you, she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. With that, she faded away, leaving behind a sense of calm and closure. The apartment felt lighter, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. I knew that Emily's spirit had finally found the peace she so desperately sought. From that night on, apartment 27 was quiet, the strange noises and sightings ceasing as if the building itself had been healed. The haunting had ended, replaced by a sense of tranquility that resonated through the halls. My experience at Cypress Ridge Penitentiary had taught me that sometimes the most profound acts of bravery involve reaching out to those who can't speak for themselves, giving voice to the voiceless, and helping lost souls find their way home. And as I continue my patrols through the city's older neighborhoods, I carry with me the lessons learned from apartment 27. In the darkness, amidst the whispers and shadows, there are stories waiting to be heard, spirits yearning for resolution, and a reminder that even in the most haunted places, there is hope for redemption and peace. Story number 5. Whispers behind bars. I've always believed that prisons hold more than just the bodies of their inmates. They contain their stories, their pains, and sometimes, their unresolved spirits. Cypress Ridge Penitentiary, nestled deep in the rural outskirts of Maine, was a place where darkness thrived, both inside and out. It wasn't just the reputation for housing the most dangerous criminals that kept most people away. It was the whispers of the unexplained phenomena that plagued the night shifts. My name is Ethan Carter, and I'm a night shift officer at Cypress Ridge. When I first took the job, I thought it would be just another routine patrol through cold, empty corridors and solitary confinement cells. But within months, I realized that Cypress Ridge was anything but ordinary. It was a particularly cold October night when everything changed. The kind of night where the wind howls through the barren trees, and the moon is just a sliver in the dark sky. I was making my rounds, walking the length of Cell Block D, a section of the prison notorious for its violent history. Decades ago, Cell Block D had been the scene of numerous brutal killings, and some say the spirits of those lost still lingered, unable to find peace. As I approached the end of the corridor, the usual sounds of the night, distant footsteps, the occasional clink of metal were absent. The silence was unnerving, pressing in on me from all sides. I paused, my breath visible in the cold air, trying to shake off the growing sense of unease. Then, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic clanging, like metal doors slamming shut. My heart raced as I turned toward the sound, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The noise seemed to come from the far end of the block, where the older cells stood like silent sentinels. I took a deep breath and continued walking, each step echoing louder than the last. As I reached the source of the sound, I saw it, a shadow moving swiftly across the wall, just beyond the reach of my light. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" No response, just the lingering sound of the clanging doors, followed by an eerie silence. I pushed forward, my hand gripping the flashlight tightly, illuminating the path ahead. That's when I saw her, a figure standing in the center of the cell, her form barely discernible in the dim light. She was dressed in what looked like an old-fashioned nightgown, her hair cascading down her shoulders in wild disarray. Her eyes were hollow, staring straight at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of my own breathing. I froze, unable to move. The temperature around me dropped suddenly, my breath turning to frost in the chilly air. The woman raised her hand, pointing toward the far end of the cell. "Find the truth. Set us free," her voice echoed, mingling with the residual sounds of the past. Before I could respond, the room seemed to shift. The walls pulsed with a dark energy, and the air grew thick with an oppressive force. Shadows danced along the corridor, taking on shapes that resembled the inmates who had perished here. Faces twisted in agony, bodies contorted in pain. I forced myself to take a step forward, my training kicking in despite the fear gripping my heart. "Who are you? What do you want from us?" The woman's form began to fade, her figure becoming more translucent with each passing second. "Expose the truth. Remember our suffering," she pleaded, her voice fading into a mournful sigh. The clanging of the doors returned, louder this time, as if the entire block was coming alive with the spirits of the past. I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering as the energy in the room intensified. "I will help you," I whispered, determination overcoming my fear. As quickly as it had started, everything stopped. The shadows receded, the cold lifted, and the woman vanished, leaving behind an unsettling stillness. I stood there for a moment, catching my breath, the weight of her request pressing heavily on my conscience. The following day, I delved into the archives, determined to uncover the history behind the hauntings of Cell Block D. What I found was a harrowing tale of corruption, brutality, and unsolved murders. The prison had a dark past, one that had been buried under layers of official records and silenced by fear. I met with old guards, former inmates, anyone who might shed light on the mysterious deaths that had occurred within these walls. Each story was more disturbing than the last: accounts of torture, unexplained disappearances, and the constant fear of the unknown. It became clear that the spirits were not just restless. They were victims seeking justice, their stories yearning to be told. One night, armed with the knowledge I had gathered, I returned to cell block D. The corridor was as silent as ever, but the air was charged with anticipation. I stood before the cell where I had encountered the spirit, my heart pounding in my chest. "I found your story," I called out, my voice steady despite the lingering fear. The temperature dropped once more, and the shadows began to shift. The same woman appeared, her presence more defined this time, her eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and hope. Tell them our truth," she implored. I nodded, determined to honor her request. "I will. Your stories won't be forgotten." As I began to speak, recounting the horrors and injustices that had plagued cell block D, the atmosphere began to change. The oppressive energy lifted, replaced by a sense of peace. The shadows softened, the air warmed, and the spirits seemed to fade into the light. Their burdens finally lifted. When I finished, the cell was silent, the spirits at rest. I knew that Cypress Ridge Penitentiary would never be the same, and neither would I. The experience had opened my eyes to the unseen struggles and untold stories that lingered in the darkest corners of the world. From that night on, I made it my mission to ensure that the voices of the forgotten were heard, to bring justice to those who had been wronged. Cypress Ridge Penitentiary remained a place of fear and mystery, but now, it also stood as a symbol of resilience and the enduring power of truth. And every time I walk those haunted halls, I remember the plea of the woman in white, a reminder that even in the darkest places, there is hope for redemption and peace. Story number 6. Echoes of Cell Block D. I've always believed that the line between reality and the supernatural is thin, almost invisible. But working as a night shift officer at the old Cypress Ridge Penitentiary in rural Maine forced me to confront that belief head-on. Cypress Ridge wasn't your typical prison. Its history was marred by brutality and bloodshed, earning it a reputation that kept most people away. Yet, here I was, patrolling its haunted halls, wondering if the stories were more than just ghost tales whispered by frightened inmates. It was a chilly October night, the kind where the fog rolls in thick from the nearby marshes, swallowing the perimeter in a blanket of gray. The penitentiary loomed in the distance, its towering walls and barred windows casting long shadows under the dim streetlights. Cypress Ridge had been closed for renovations, but temporary guards like me were still needed to keep an eye on the inmates who refused to leave. Stuck between the past and an uncertain future, my shift began with the usual routine: checking the outer perimeter, ensuring all gates were secure, and walking the narrow corridors that felt more like a labyrinth than a prison. The building itself was a relic from the early 1900s, its stone walls weathered by time and neglect. Stories of brutal punishments and mysterious deaths were common, but nothing concrete ever emerged, just hushed conversations and fearful glances. As midnight approached, the silence of the night was punctuated by the occasional drip of water from the old pipes and the distant hoot of an owl. I was making my rounds in cell block D, one of the oldest sections of the prison, when I first heard it, a soft clanging noise echoing through the halls. At first, I dismissed it as the wind rattling the old metal doors, but the sound persisted, growing slightly louder and more insistent. I approached the nearest cell, a cold breeze brushing past me as I reached for the latch. The door swung open with a creak, revealing an empty cell bathed in the pale light of my flashlight. No inmate was inside, but the clanging noise seemed to emanate from deeper within the block. My heart pounded as I followed the sound, each step echoing ominously in the empty corridor. As I walked, the temperature seemed to drop, my breath visible in the beam of my light. The clanging grew louder, now accompanied by faint whispers that seemed to swirl around me like mist. I tried to steady my nerves, telling myself it was just the old building settling or the inmates playing tricks in the dark. But something felt wrong, an oppressive presence pressing down on me. I reached the end of the corridor, where the walls seemed to close in, the air thick with an unseen tension. The clanging stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence. Then, out of nowhere, I heard it again, clearer this time, a voice calling my name, low and desperate. "Officer, David." I froze, my flashlight flickering as the voice echoed through the hallway. My mind raced, trying to recall any inmate named David. But there was no one by that name in cell block D. Panic set in as the whispers intensified, the air growing colder, making it hard to breathe. "David, help us," the voice pleaded, the sound wavering like a fragile thread. I turned, scanning the darkness, but there was no one there. Shadows danced at the edges of my vision, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing just beyond the reach of the light, a woman in a tattered dress, her face obscured by long, dark hair. She raised a hand, fingers clawing at the air as if trying to grasp something just out of reach. I took a step back, my heart racing. "I'm here to help," I called out, my voice wavering despite my efforts to stay calm. The figure vanished, and the whispers faded into the silence once more. I stood there, breathless, trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. Was it a ghost, a hallucination, or something else entirely? Determined to find answers, I continued my patrol, keeping a keen eye out for any signs of the apparition. Hours passed with no further incidents, and the first light of dawn began to seep through the fog, dissipating the eerie atmosphere that had gripped the night. I thought the night's horrors were over, but as I reached the main entrance, my radio crackled to life. "Officer Thompson, do you copy? We need you at cell block D. Now," came the urgent voice of Sergeant Miller. I glanced down the radio, a chill running down my spine. "What's happening, Sergeant?" "There's been an incident. One of the inmates claims he saw something he can't explain. He's hysterical and scared." I hurried back to cell block D, my mind replaying the ghostly encounter. As I entered the block, the atmosphere felt different, charged with a palpable tension. I approached the cell in question, a solitary confinement unit notorious for housing the most violent and disturbed inmates. Inside, a man named Tommy was pacing frantically, his eyes wide with fear. "It's real, officer. I saw her. She was standing there, just like you said," he exclaimed, pointing towards the far end of the cell. I placed a hand on his shoulder, trying to calm him down. "Tommy, it's okay. I'm here to help. Can you describe what you saw?" Tommy shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "She was crying, officer. Her eyes were so sad, and she kept calling my name. I couldn't move. I was frozen with fear." I felt a pang of empathy for the man. Knowing the isolation and darkness of solitary confinement could drive someone to the brink. But Tommy's description matched mine too closely, making me question if there was something more at play here. "We're going to look into this, Tommy. I promise," I assured him before stepping out to investigate further. As I walked down the corridor, the memories of the night's earlier events resurfaced. Was the woman a lingering spirit from the prison's violent past? Cypress Ridge had seen countless tragedies, murders, suicides, and unexplained deaths. Each story added to the dark tapestry that shrouded the penitentiary in mystery and fear. I decided to consult the prison records, digging into the history of cell block D. The stories were gruesome, tales of inmates who had met untimely and brutal ends, their spirits rumored to haunt the very walls they once roamed. One in particular stood out: Eleanor Ellie Hartley, a nurse who had been brutally murdered in the 1940s by a group of inmates seeking revenge against her for exposing their corruption and brutality. Legends spoke of Ellie's restless spirit, forever trapped in the prison, unable to find peace. She was often seen in the night, her cries echoing through the halls, her presence felt but rarely seen. The more I read, the more I realized that Tommy's encounter was likely tied to Ellie's tragic fate. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to spend some time alone in cell block D after my shift ended. Armed with my flashlight and a notebook, I wanted to experience firsthand what the inmates were talking about. As the night deepened, The prison settled into an oppressive silence, broken only by the distant sounds of dripping water and the occasional shuffling footsteps. I settled into one of the empty cells, hoping to hear something that could explain the eerie occurrences. Hours passed with no sign of the supernatural, and just as I was beginning to doubt my own sanity, I heard it, a faint whisper, almost imperceptible, calling my name. Officer David. My heart raced as I scanned the darkness, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the gloom. There she was, a shadowy figure standing at the end of the corridor, her form barely visible. Ellie Hartley, or at least, her ghostly apparition. She raised her hand, fingers twitching as if trying to communicate something important. I took a cautious step forward, my voice barely above a whisper. Ellie, I'm here to help you. What do you need? The air grew colder, my breath visible in the flashlight's beam. Ellie's figure seemed to shimmer, her sorrow palpable. Find the truth. Set me free. Before I could respond, the temperature plummeted, and the walls seemed to close in around me. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like a cold, haunting breeze. I felt a presence pressing in on me, the weight of Ellie's anguish bearing down on my soul. Determined to break the cycle, I vowed to uncover the full story behind her death and give her the closure she deserved. The following days were spent poring over old case files, interviewing former guards, and piecing together the fragmented history of Cypress Ridge. Each revelation brought me closer to the truth, but also deeper into the prison's dark embrace. One evening, as I was about to leave, a sudden power outage plunged the building into darkness. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving me in pitch black. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my phone's flashlight, but the screen wouldn't turn on. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of metal doors slamming shut and footsteps echoing through the corridors. A soft voice reached my ears, clear and sorrowful. David, help me. I froze, recognizing Ellie's voice, summoning all my courage. I followed the sound, my hands trembling as I navigated the darkened halls. The whispers grew louder, guiding me toward the heart of cell block D. There, in the center of the block, stood the apparition of Ellie Hartley, her form more defined than ever. She reached out to me, her eyes filled with endless pain. You must expose the truth. Tell the world what happened here. I nodded, understanding her plea. This wasn't just about uncovering a tragic story. It was about giving a voice to the voiceless, about seeking justice for those who couldn't speak for themselves. As I documented her final words, the oppressive atmosphere began to lift, the temperature warming slightly. Ellie's figure began to fade, her sorrow giving way to a peaceful expression. Thank you, David. With that, she was gone, leaving behind a sense of calm and the faintest whisper of gratitude in the air. The following weeks saw significant changes at Cypress Ridge. The truth about the 1940s murders was finally brought to light, leading to a re-examination of past cases and the exoneration of several wrongfully convicted inmates. The prison began to undergo true renovations, not just physical, but also healing its dark history. I continued my patrols with a new sense of purpose, knowing that sometimes the past refuses to stay buried until its stories are told and its spirits are set free. Cypress Ridge Penitentiary remained a place of fear and mystery, but now, it also stood as a testament to the power of truth and the hope for redemption. And every night, as I drive those haunted halls, I can't help but feel a lingering presence. Ellie's spirit watching over me, a silent guardian ensuring that her story is never forgotten. Story number 7. The Haunting on Highway 101. I never believed in ghosts, not until that night on Highway 101 changed everything I thought I knew about the world. My name is Mark Reynolds, and I'm a patrol officer with the California Highway Patrol. For years, I've cruised the highways and byways of this state, dealing with everything from minor traffic violations to serious accidents. But nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered that foggy October evening. It was nearing midnight, The kind of time when the world feels like it's holding its breath. I was on my usual patrol route, driving my cruiser down the stretch of Highway 101 that cuts through the less traveled parts of the state. The air was thick with mist, the fog so dense it made the distant lights of oncoming cars look like ghostly apparitions. Visibility was minimal, and the road seemed endless, swallowed by the darkness on either side. As I approached mile marker 45, I noticed something unusual: a sedan parked on the shoulder, its headlights off, the interior completely dark. It wasn't uncommon to see abandoned cars out here, but there was something different about this one. Maybe it was the way it stood there, completely still, as if frozen in time. Or perhaps it was the eerie silence that enveloped the area, broken only by the occasional drip of water from the misty air. Curiosity got the better of me. I slowed down, turning on my patrol car's engine and flashing my lights behind the sedan. "Hello? Are you okay? Do you need assistance?" I called out, my voice steady despite the unease creeping up my spine. There was no response, just the sound of my own voice echoing into the night. I parked a few feet away, rolling down my window to get a better look. The interior of the car was shrouded in darkness, the silence palpable. I reached for my flashlight, the beam cutting through the fog inside the vehicle. But still, nothing moved. No sign of life, no driver, no passengers, nothing. I stepped out of my cruiser, the cold night air biting at my cheeks. As I approached the sedan, the temperature seemed to drop even further, my breath visible in the beam of my flashlight. I tried the door handle, it was unlocked. With a deep breath, I opened the door and peered inside. The car was immaculate, too immaculate. It was as if it had just been parked there moments ago. Yet the surrounding area bore no signs of recent activity. I called out again, louder this time. "Hello? Are you there?" Suddenly, I heard it, a faint, muffled sound coming from the back seat. It was like a whisper, barely audible over the hum of my patrol car's engine. My heart started to race. "Who's there? Show yourself." Before I could react, the temperature in the car plummeted. A gust of icy wind swept through, making the air shimmer with frost. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me. The whisper grew louder, more distinct, turning into a desperate plea. "Help me." I took a step back, my mind struggling to process what was happening. I glanced around, half expecting to see another officer or a passerby. But the road was empty, just me, the sedan, and the thick blanket of fog. Summoning my courage, I reached into the back seat, my hand shaking as I felt around in the darkness. And then I felt something cold, something unnaturally icy. I pulled back abruptly, my flashlight flickering as if struggling against an unseen force. I stood there, heart pounding, as the front window of the sedan began to frost over from the inside, patterns forming like intricate lace. The whispering turned into audible sobs, the sound of a woman crying out in anguish. "Please, help me." I couldn't tear my eyes away. It was as if the woman inside the car was trying to communicate, to reach out to me from beyond. My training kicked in, telling me to stay professional, to remain calm, but the fear was overwhelming. I decided to call it in. "Dispatch, this is Officer Reynolds on Highway 101. I need assistance at mile marker 45. Possible distressed individual in vehicle." The dispatcher acknowledged my call, assuring me that backup was on the way. But as I waited, the phenomena intensified. The car seemed to come alive, the frost patterns growing more intricate, the sobbing more desperate. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The temperature returned to normal, the frost melting away, and the sedan stood silent and empty once more. I stood there for a moment, trying to catch my breath. The image of the crying woman burned into my memory. When backup arrived, they found nothing unusual, no signs of struggle, no evidence of anyone ever being in the car. It was as if the woman had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the cold chill and the echo of her sorrow. I reported the incident, sharing every detail with my colleagues. Most of them dismissed it as a trick of the light, perhaps a hallucination brought on by the isolation and the fog. But one of them, a seasoned officer named Tom, looked at me with a knowing expression. "That area has a dark history," he said quietly. "There was a tragic accident here about 10 years ago. A woman was driving home after a late shift, lost control in the fog, and her car went off the road. She didn't survive. Some folks say her spirit still roams these parts, searching for help she never got." I nodded, the pieces of the puzzle finally fitting together. The woman I saw was likely her, forever trapped in that moment of desperation, unable to find peace. Over the following weeks, I couldn't shake the encounter. Every time I drove down Highway 101 at night, especially when the fog rolled in, I felt her presence. It was as if she was still out there, waiting for someone to help her find her way home. One night, months later, I was once again patrolling the same stretch of road. The fog was thicker than ever, the darkness almost tangible. I was about to dismiss it as another long, uneventful night when I saw her, the woman in white, standing by the roadside, her figure barely visible through the mist. This time, I didn't hesitate. I slowed down, flashing my lights as I approached. "Hello? Are you okay? Do you need help?" She turned to face me, her eyes hollow and filled with an eternal sadness. "Please, help me." I pulled over, my heart racing. I reached for the door handle, but before I could open it, a cold wind swept through the car, and she vanished, leaving behind a lingering chill and the echo of her plea. I stood there, staring into the empty road, feeling her pain resonate within me. That night, I realized that some souls never find their way home, and some calls for help are never truly answered. From that day forward, I approached my job with a newfound respect for the unseen, the spirits that linger between the living and the dead. And every time I see a sedan parked on the side of Highway 101, I can't help but wonder if it's just another abandoned vehicle, or if it's the lonely presence of a woman searching for the help she never received. Because out there, in the foggy shadows of the night, some spirits are still reaching out, hoping someone will hear their cry and guide them to peace. And if you're ever driving alone down those deserted stretches, keep an eye out. You never know when you might be called upon to answer their silent pleas.